Good evening from Mountain Time, Tsechen Namdrol Ling. And I know many of you are in different locations, far away places around the world, Korea, Russia, different places in the United States and overseas. So welcome. Very happy to see everyone this evening. Tonight, as you know, we're presenting our esteemed speaker, Glenn Mullin. And many of you will know him, I'm sure, from either teachings that he has given or possibly from the mystical arts tours around the United States or in other kinds of situations. So I'll give a little bit of information just in case. And as we know, Glenn is a Tibetologist. He is a Buddhist writer. He is a translator of classical Tibetan literature and also a teacher of Tantric Buddhist meditation. Glenn lived in the Himalayas, the Indian Himalayas, between 1972 and 1984. And there he studied philosophy, literature, meditation, yoga, and Enlightenment culture under 35 of the greatest masters of all four lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. And many of you will know his books. He has authored approximately 30 books on Tibetan Buddhism. And as I previously mentioned, he founded and directed the Mystical Arts of Tibet tour and also publication on the Mystical Arts of Tibet collection. And he has curated a number of important Tibetan art exhibitions as well. So Glenn will be speaking this evening, of course, and then there will be a very brief break. There he is. And there will be time for questions and answers. So please type your questions into the chat window. And Lamala?
Thank you.
Take it away.
Jordan.
Jodang Soki Chok Namla Changchu Bardo Dakne Kiab Suchi Kijin So Peso Namke Drola Penchir Sangye Du Parshu.
They were Gutran to market. Sinjin Domje Dungal and Dungi Gutran to market. Sinjin Domje Dungamewe, they were to meet her market. Sinjin Domje Niran Charan. Tonyo la ne bardo chioma sobo wa shodo saba dama sobo wa shodo hong tompan yi tu gyur. So great honor, a great pleasure for me to say a few words through the auspices, the portal of the Sakya Center that's emerging in being created in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'd like to thank the members of and the administrators of that Dharma Center for their invitation. I'm going to plug in my earphones just so I don't get a roundabout of sound coming through. And I would like to say, yes, sometimes I put up the Amityas behind me, and sometimes I put up a Tanka style print with my various Sawe Lamas or root gurus. And one of those is Sakya Tsechen Rinpoche, former head of Sakya. Now I think we could say retired former. He's still really the head, you could say, but not administratively so. And I had the great honor and pleasure of meeting Sakya Rinpoche many, many times during my years in India. In Dharamsala, he would visit Dharamsala from time to time to hold conference with the Gyalwar Rinpoche, the Dalai Lama. And of course, when Dalai Lama gave Kala Chakras and other such events, he would usually come as one of the guest of honors, and Gyalwar Rinpoche would ask him to give teaching initiations to the crowd, to the assembly, before and after and during the various events to do with the usually 10 or 12-day festival associated with those kind of mass Lama gatherings. And on a number of occasions, I had the honor and pleasure of attending longer transmissions given by Sakya Rinpoche. So a great honor to do something with the Santa Fe Center. And April suggested April, who is sort of spearheading the center out there and one of the half dozen people working hard to bring it into existence, suggested a number of titles. And one of those was to something about the 6 bardos, or living and dying and enlightenment and so on. So I was tossing around different ideas. And I came up with staggering through the 6 bardos on the way to enlightenment. Then I thought, well, staggering. There might be some teetotalers who don't stagger, but they stumble. So even non-teetotalers stumble as well as stagger. So I thought, rather than staggering to enlightenment during the 6 bardos, we go for stumbling to enlightenment during the path of the 6 bardos. The idea in Mahayana Buddhism, in all schools of Mahayana Buddhism, is that we are all destined for enlightenment. And I think this is one of the aspects of Buddhism that very deeply appealed to me. Growing up in a kind of a Western style culture, where the idea of good and evil and God and the devil and sort of eternal heavens and eternal hells and so on, even though these have great merit and have great benefit in many ways spiritually, the idea that even the most mean, cruel, evil person is actually stumbling toward enlightenment appealed deeply to my sense of my own weakness. The idea that I myself could end up on the wrong end of that gamut, because we never really know with changing ideas and moralities who's going to end up in which end of that, eternal heaven or eternal hell. Things change in culture century to century for what is good and what is evil and so on. So I love that idea in Dharma, in Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, that everyone is on the way to enlightenment. And people may or may not get on a direct path. They may take 2 steps forward and 3 back, and they may take completely a road in the wrong direction at some intersection or other. And if we look at many of the great villains in history, we could see how they could almost equally have been heroes, except for 1 or 2 crossroads in their lives that took them one way as opposed to the other. Now then this word bardo, until we achieve enlightenment, we are always in bardo. We're always in a state of moving between one thing to another. We are always stumbling along, carrying our Buddha nature, carrying our radiance, and sometimes wisdom's becoming obscured by attachments, aversions, and therefore wrong decisions getting made, and the light of wisdom getting obscured. And rather than end up in an expected happiness, we can end up in an unexpected catastrophe. The bardo were always between one thing or another. And this bardo process, a bigger name for it, kora in Sanskrit, or korawa, meaning samsara, going basically more circular, more round and round, like sometimes an example of it's illustrated by the metaphor of a dog chasing its tail, just running in circles. And one of the games board games by legend created by, I believe it was Sakya Pandita, one of the Gongmanga, the 5 great early Sakya masters, a game called Reincarnation. Sometimes we can just, almost like snakes and ladders, end up in the snake's mouth and go down the ladder and have to come up all the way, and then sometimes hit the ladder and go up, and eventually in the board game created of Reincarnation, created by legend created by Sakya Pandita, one of the great early Sakya masters, we find enlightenment. We arrive at enlightenment. Enlightenment, we could say, is the end of bardo. So April said, what about 6 bardos? And I said, well, all of the new schools, and Sakya is a new school, Kagyu, all these schools that emerged in the 11th century, largely with translations of Buddhist lineages that were very popular throughout Central India and East India, everywhere from Bengal, which, by the way, at the time, Bengal, especially Bangladesh, was the richest country known to Central Asians. It was Bengal at the time was probably the richest country on earth, and that was completely inspired by the sort of Buddhist doctrine. So those new schools created in the 11th century, from about 1100 to say about 1000 to 1150 or something like that. Mostly those schools mostly spoke about three bardos. Until Enlightenment, we're kind of in one of 3 places. We're either awake, or we're asleep, or we're dead. And so one of those is called Kiene Bardo in Tibetan, the bardo of the place of birth, place of being born. But it really refers to a waking state. And the other, when we're asleep, and in the traditional literature, is referred to as Milam Bardo, the bardo of dreams. And then during our whole life, we go through these 2. We're awake and we're asleep. When we're awake, we're either walking in circles, or like in Sakya Pandita's board game of reincarnation, as in snakes and ladders, we step into a snake's mouth and go down a few rungs, or we hit a ladder and go up a few rungs. But generally, we stumble along cultivating goodness, cultivating wisdom. And then at night, whatever happens when we go to sleep, we either cultivate further wisdom, or, like one of my lamas once put it, most people during the day mainly cultivate negative karma, and then they go to sleep at night and dream more of the same. But if we practice Dharma, and Dharma here is a general name, doesn't mean Buddhism, it just means a kind of spiritual method leading to deeper understanding of life, deeper cultivation of goodness and wisdom, conscious cultivation of goodness and wisdom. So sometimes we'll see Dharma translated as Buddhism. When if it's supposed to refer to Buddhism, usually it'll say Sangye Kicho, Buddha Dharma. Or sometimes Tibetan texts will say Nong Pecho, the inner Dharma. Inner because of its staying between the idea of eternality or reification and nihilism, denial and reification. In other words, Dharma, as a sense, is Ranging O Zimpa, something having its own, something revealing or holding to its own nature, Ranging O Zimba. So stumbling through the bardos on the way to enlightenment. So if we say three, as most if we read the writings of the early days of the formation of the new schools, Kadampas, Sakyapas, Kagyupas, Ralupas, Shalupas, the 10 or 12 new schools that formed in the 11th century and early 12th century, and are based on what they call the Chigyar, the new translations. Nyingma meaning those translations mainly done about 500 years earlier, and mainly coming from the west side, as well as from the north side, from Khotan, from Udayana, Kashmir, and so forth. Then during life, our Dharma practice is learning how to live from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep in a mindful way, cultivating Sogni is the Tibetan expression, Sogni, the two accumulations, deepening our familiarity with goodness, you could say, familiarity with goodness, Sonam Gisok. And then Yeshe Gisok, of deepening our wisdom, our understanding, the way the mind processes experience. During the day, and then at night, going to sleep mindfully and trying to utilize the sleep dream state in such a way that the nighttime, when we're asleep, becomes something we could say of Dharma practice in and of itself. Now, I really loved that aspect of Dharma, of Tibetan Buddhism, when I first started reading about it as a teenager, reading a Tibetan Book of the Dead and Book of those sort of Evans Wentz editions of the Lama Dawa Kezi Sandup translations of those four great Tibetan books. Tibetan Book of the Dead, Tibetan Book of Great Liberation, Life of Milarepa, and Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines. I really loved that idea that going to sleep at night was not just lying down, entering the sleep state and sort of resting and recuperating to get up and run around the next day, but rather that it was entering a very subtle state of consciousness where one really has, you could say, 6 to 8 or 9 hours of quality time with oneself in a very comfortable meditation posture that is stretched out on a very comfortable mattress and snoring. So I really loved that idea that when you're awake, you can use every moment that you're awake in a spiritual way. And regardless of what you're doing, if you're, chopping wood for the fire. I grew up in the countryside, and the first 9 years of my life, we had a wooden fireplace. And although we had a kind of an oil furnace as backup, we would always chop our wood, and my dad always preferred the wood fire to the oil fire because of the aroma and the whole kind of feeling it gave and all that. Whether one is chopping wood or cooking or washing dishes or going to school, or, because I was born in a Christian family, then if I was doing the Lord's Prayer or getting ready for bed, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take, etc. But we didn't actually have anything to take real advantage of that nighttime. So I really love that aspect. And of course, in Sakya school, one of the main practices is Naropa Chudma, Doshina Jarma, the Naropa's Dakini or Naropa's Kachari, Vajrayogini. And the practice of Vajrayogini, which is very central to Sakya in general, and from Sakya, of course, goes into other schools. And the Dalai Lama school, coming from Tsongkhapa, about a third of Lama Tsongkhapa's gurus were Sakya, and Rendowa, the Lama who raised him from age 4 or so on, when he first was sort of given to the monastic community and became his tutor, remained one of his main tutors for more than, I think, 30 years, until Rendowa's death, really. And so Dorje Naljorma comes into Gelugpa, this idea that actually our spiritual practice doesn't begin in the morning when we wake up, but rather it begins at night when we go to bed. In the Dorje Naljorma, Naropa Chudma, Naropa's Dakini, the instruction given by Naropa on how to practice Vajrayogini as a Shinto Sangwa, very esoteric method, is begin the practice before going to sleep at night. And as you go to sleep, regard the going to sleep and the sleep dream state as the foundation of the practice, the very foundation of the practice. And you wake up the next morning, what you learned overnight, your ting is in your absorption overnight, should point to a more profound way of practice during the day. So then the second yoga becomes waking up yoga, coming out of the sleep spaceship, the spaceship of sleep, causing that spaceship to take a gentle spiritual landing and opening the door of the 5 senses in a very conscious way. So bringing the mind of the luminous nature of sleep and the illusory appearances of dreams in sleep become the foundation of the daytime practice. So I think otherwise, most traditions, we think, yeah, I get up in the morning and I practice well, and then that's when I really have control of my conscious mind, and that's when everything goes in that I can take charge because I'm awake. And when I'm asleep, well, who knows? I dream of a dog chasing me and I pick up a stick and hit him on the head. I have no control over that. Or I dream of a beautiful jewel in someone else's pocket and I pickpocket them. I have no way to take a different course. I'm in an uncontrolled state. So I love that aspect, how our real practice begins from going to sleep and noticing the illusory nature of sleep, noticing how in sleep we go between very busy illusory experience and a kind of a radiant quiet between dreams and waking up in the morning. And that takes us into the daytime practice. So those are the two periods, during the day and during the night, which are two of the three bardos that we have the opportunity for achieving enlightenment in this lifetime. And if we practice well, the seventh Dalai Lama once put it, with so many great lineages still extant from both Sutra and Tantra, anyone with an IQ bigger than that of a goat can certainly get to enlightenment. And he should know, because he got there, and we don't know exactly what his IQ was, but anyway, he got there. So anyone with an IQ bigger than a goat practicing in those two periods can achieve enlightenment. But of course, some people don't. And therefore, in the 6 yogas of Naropa, which is often transmitted together with the Vajrayogini, and in the Sakya tradition is not maintained as 6 yogas of Naropa, but is maintained as what is known as the 10 dharmas, Naro Chu Chu, the 10 dharmas of Naropa. But if we make it six yogas, then we can do these 2 during the day. And the third opportunity for enlightenment is at the time of death in the bardo, after death in the bardo, while dying, after death, and in the bardo. And so these make the 3 bardos that we have as our opportunity for enlightenment. When we're awake during life, when we're asleep and dreaming during life. And if we didn't get, we can call that plan A. And if we didn't get there, then at the time of death, taking what we learned and cultivated during life, what we learned of subtle states of mind, subtle states of consciousness during our lifetimes, and carrying that into the hereafter as the bardo of becoming between death and rebirth. So the new tantras, Guhya Samajara, Chakrasamvara, He Vajra, Yamantaka, and so forth, mostly speak of these 3 bardos. How to achieve enlightenment in the bardo, Kine bardo, in the bardo between Ke Chi bardo, the bardo between birth and death. And then how to achieve, if we don't achieve it by the time we die, how to die in such a way that our spiritual path will continue in a very direct way. In other words, sort of carrying the jewels of Dharma that we mastered in waking and sleeping state, carrying those into the bardo and applying them at that time. In 6 yogas of Naropa, this is done in one of 2 ways at the time of death, either poa, by means of projection, bypassing the bardo, or if we're more brave, going into the bardo and trying to execute those yogas apply those yogas in the bardo. So then so I was saying, well, we could say 3 bardos. But April mentioned 6, so I thought, well, we'll go with 3. And then next day when I wrote back, I said, oh, well, let's add the 6. Otherwise, people will say, hey, there's 3 that Glenn doesn't know about. How come he only knows 3? What about those other 3 that we often hear about? And these 3 have come from what is known in Tibetan as the Ngagyur tradition, the early translation period, the early transmission period, which means everything before Rinchen Lotsa Lotsuwa Rinchen Zampo, or Lochen Rinpoche, the great translator who initiated the Renaissance period of the 11th century that gave birth to all the new schools. And those 6 are not something which are not in the 3, but rather they just further divide the 3 for practical purposes. And one of the main divisions, making a 4th, is the Sumden Bardo. And Sumden is the 5th paramita in Bodhisattvayana, or General Mahayana. It's a word that in Chinese became Chan, mispronounced as Chan, Jan in Sanskrit, although who knows how it was really pronounced in the Buddha's time, and became Zen in Korea and Sun, Zen in Japan and Sun in Korea. Just variations on the pronunciation of Jan. When I looked on the internet, I noticed a number of people used the term samadhi for it, but it's not samadhi actually. There's a big difference in Buddhism between samadhi, a kind of a mental power, you could say. It's sort of like a concentration power. And jhana is more of a sort of a wider meaning to it. You could say it's more a kind of a contemplative posture. I'm not sure if one could, there are definitions of it, but I'm not sure if many of those kind of definitions used in Abhidharma translate very meaningfully into English. If we put it another way, difference between samadhi and jhana is samadhi can be just a mental focus held on almost anything. Whereas I think jhana has to have a kind of a balance between the appearing nature of phenomena and the emptiness nature of what appears. In other words, it has to keep a balance between looking at the forest and being lost in the forest, or looking at the trees and losing the vision of the forest. I think it's got something to do with that, the forest and trees phenomena. So it's called the Bardo of Jhana. And they separate this from generally daytime practice and generally milam practice, dream yoga. They separate it because it's a kind of a bardo from the time you hit your meditation cushion to the time of getting up from your meditation cushion. It's a little different than the rest of your day. It's something, you're between 2 points and beginning and end of your session, whether it's on your meditation cushion or it's walking around a stupa, like a walking meditation, or any other kind of set dharma practice. All of those go under the title of Jhana Bardo, Samdem Bardo. And so the 3 become 4 in that way. And the 4 become 5 by taking the death rebirth state and further subdividing them, adding 2 more. Chunyi Bardo, the Chike Bardo, well, taking the 1 and making it 3. Taking the Bardo of death and making it into 3. Chunyi Bardo, Chike Bardo, Chunyi Bardo, and Sipe Bardo. So from the time one starts to die. And we've all seen this in Humphrey Bogart movies and classical American sort of Hollywood cowboy movies and whatnot, where the hero gets shot and then slowly, and then slowly, and then slowly, then makes a comeback and slowly. The stages of death, we could say, Chikia Bardo. So dividing death into three, then the bardo of birth really then, what is Chikia Bardo in Kechi Bardo in the threefold system becomes three, becomes Kene Bardo, the bardo of waking, Milam Bardo, the bardo of sleeping, and Samdam Bardo, the bardo of formal spiritual contemplative practice, yogic or contemplative practice. And then the death bardo becomes three by the death process. Then Chunyi bardo, the bardo of dharmata. Chunyi means reality itself, you could say. It kind of have a, Chutang Chunyi in, if we use it in a sutra word, a very famous kind of text in the world of Buddhism is a text from the Asanga collection of writings, the 5 books of Maitreya and the 5 treatises of Asanga. Chutang Chunyi, Dharma and Dharmata. Dharma becomes the way we deal with everything we experience. And dharmata is something like what is beyond the ordinary appearances of things. So we could say dharma is the way we experience a beautiful chocolate cake. And dharmata is the emptiness, the shunya nature of the chocolate cake, the infinity nature, the way in which the chocolate cake is directly connected to the infinity of being. One of my gurus, the great Lama Tubten Yeshe, who created the FPMT, the FUMT group of Buddhist centers, FUMT, Foundation for the Preservation of Tibetan Tradition, FUMT. I think he gave it that kind of acronym because he knew it was going to become quite big in many different countries. And so he didn't want something that was just easy to pronounce in one language, but was equally difficult in all languages. As he used to put it, yes, practicing Dharma walks through the supermarket, but don't come down in the chocolate factory. So Dharma and Dharmata. So the dividing the death's rebirth into 3, from the time we begin to seriously shut down in the dying process, all the way through the dissolution of the 4 coarse elements and the 3 radiant appearances leading up to clear light mind. And sometimes even included in that is after the experience of the clear light minds, we kind of have very radiant, in books like Tibetan Book of the Dead, they're called the radiant appearances of the peaceful and wrathful Buddhas. But they're very bright, radiant appearances. They're really appearing on the Dharma side of things. Everything is very heavenly, very radiant and very blissful and joyful, even if it's a little bit on the overly bright side, kind of like whiteout, like driving along in a little scooter and in India, and you come around a corner and meet a bus with its lights way too bright and not pointed in the right direction, and you're just sort of blinded by the light. So that's sometimes thrown into Chunyi Bardo. And we see that in near-death experiences. Many people who die say yes, and they die and then come back. We call them near-death experiences, NDE. They die perhaps on an operating table, or they had hit by a truck or something, or drowned, and technically were dead, but because they were deeply frozen, the brain still wasn't damaged or whatever, and they come back from it. And they often talk about a tunnel of light and how blissful everything was thereafter, and so on. Now, usually this is just tied into kind of the Chunyi Bardo, because the clear light of the moment of death for most people, if not yogically trained, is very brief. And similarly, people not yogically trained, the radiant appearances of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I suppose if you were a Christian, rather than peaceful and wrathful mandalas, it would be Christ and the Madonna and the saints and whatever. Chunyi Bardo. So Chike Bardo, the process leading up to the clear light experience. Chunyi Bardo, the spiritual, beautiful part of Bardo. And then, ta-da, 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 the scary Bardo. After we come out all of the beautiful tunnels of light, and if we've practiced with Buddhist meditations all our life, then we'll Shenrazis and Manjusris and some Vajrapanis, and or if we've practiced Chakra Samvara, then the Chakra Samvara Mandala, Dakini, and so forth. Or if we've done Guhya Samasha, then that mandala. Or if we've practiced Nyingma or Bunpo, then the Shitro, the mandala of 100 peaceful, wrathful deities, which is what we see in Karma Lingpa's Bardo Tudol, Tibetan Book of Liberation Through Herring, or Tibetan Book of Liberation in the Bardo. But anyway, whatever it is, that Chunyi Bardo, you could say, is the beautiful side of dying. When we relax into the light and we come out and we're still flying on the positivity of things. And then we sort of have to start digesting some of the undigested materials of our life. Some of that heavy grains and gravel and whatnot that we chewed on and swallowed prematurely and died without digesting. Angers and hatreds and fears and phobias and so forth. And that's the Sipe Bardo, the scary, little bit, sort of like an action flick of looking for the next rebirth and hopping from one pillar to post and thinking, oh goodness, we're going back into this again. Let's see where, how. So the 6 bardos like that. So if we take practices like the 6 yogas of Naropa, 6 yogas of Niguma, or in Sakya, the 10 dharmas of Naropa, or practices like Chakra Samvara and Vajrayogini, then during our lifetime, during daytime, we practice Tun and Jetob. We practice formal sessions of contemplation, you could say, and we practice between sessions In other words, we get up in the morning and we think, here we are another day. I'm Vajra Yogini waking from my sleep, and I'll get up and open my eyes and listen to my ears and hear the Dakas and Dakinis, see the world as mandala, all experiences, all things arriving as emanations of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas come to help me evolve to a higher and higher level of merit and wisdom, goodness and wisdom. And perhaps we'll have a cup of tea or coffee, or Irish, maybe Irish coffee. And we'll stumble to our meditation cushion, or stagger to our meditation cushion, to our morning session. Now, if we're practicing Tantra, especially highest yoga Tantra, so in Sakya, for instance, Chakra Samvara, Hivajra, Guhya Samaja, those are the three biggies, either in their form of Yab-yum, male, female, or else in either just a male or a female Dakini aspect. On our meditation cushion, we will practice, we could say, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana as a interconnected syncretic whole. Hinayana as discipline, samadhi, and non-self, wisdom of beyond grasping at ordinary appearance or self-imaging, understanding the placidity of one's sense of self. The placidity. I like that word, plasticity, of the nature of self, because recently I've been watching a lot of medical videos on brain plasticity and how many people with brain disorders from birth and car accidents and so on, if they get the right pointers through brain plasticity, can learn to totally re-educate themselves, relive as a new self. Well, our sense of self is a little bit like that. When we say no self in Buddhism, it's kind of very misleading, I think. It sounds kind of nihilistic. Who are you? The self doesn't exist. It sounds silly, doesn't it? Because I know the self does exist, because there's me, and I have to feed my mouth, and when my tummy's full and I have to go to the bathroom, if I can't go to the bathroom, it's a very messy affair. And we see that when people are forced to take very long train rides, and there's no bathroom on the train or bus rides and so on. So the plasticity of the nature of self, how the self that we think we are is not really much to do with the nature of self. And then Mahayana, refuge, bodhicitta, the sixth paramita. Then 2 stages of Tantra. So if we do Vajrayogini Narokachudma, which is very dominant practice in Sakya, then going into the yogas of the sadhana, and at the time of doing mantra, doing the verbal recitation, and then the mind recitation being the completion stage yoga. And if we want, of course, we can supplement that with the other pointers, completion stage practices as taught in Chakra Samvara, Hevajra, Guhya Samaja, or whatever other lineages, transmissions we have received, whatever other, not only transmissions, but instructions we have received. So we do that practice. Then we get up and we go to the bank, and we happen to be a stock investor. So we get in and we sit at our computer all the day thinking, how can I benefit all myself and all living beings by enlightenment? And we make the world more rich. Or we're a taxi driver and get in our taxi. How can I help people get from A to B when they need to go from A to B? And between meditations, practice, seeing all things as an illusion and so forth. So during the daytime, doing the 2 practices, daytime ordinary practice and daytime on the meditation session practice. And at night, go to sleep, practice the yoga of sleep and dreams. And because the yoga of sleep and dreams is so much connected to the bardo, taking yoga of sleep and dreams as being kind of a preparatory ground for going into the bardo, for preparing for death. I said going to sleep is a little bit like dying. The clear light of the moment before sleep is a little bit like the clear light moment before death. The way energies dissolve when coarse and subtle when you go to sleep are a little bit like how they dissolve at the time of dying. The dream body is a little bit like the bardo body. The more fluent you become in flying the airplane of the dream body, the more fluid and fluent you will be in flying the airplane of the bardo body after you find yourself dead and in the bardo. So that kind of statement is made there. And of course, throughout our life, if we practice well, then it's said by accomplishing the 2 stages of Tantra, generation completion stage, together with the view here meaning Mahamudra or whatever expression we want to use for it. And then we achieve enlightenment in one lifetime. If not at the time of death, then we either take up Poa practice to bypass the bardo or enter the bardo as a distinct, direct practice. And we're going to take a little break in a few minutes. Before we do that, I just wanted to make some references because we're using 6 bardos. I wanted to make some references to the 6 bardos from the standard sort of aspiration that's often practiced. Aspiration here meaning pranidhana in Sanskrit or Mullin in Tibetan. We can call it a prayer, but I don't like that word prayer very much because it kind of has a theistic meaning in our Western language, where here it's not really a theistic sense. So the first bardo, as I mentioned, Kene, the bardo of our birth, and really means when we're awake during our life. When this comes, when this arises, the sharana. Sharana means when this is what we are experiencing. So many people translate that shara as when this dawns, like in the sun rising in the morning. Before it sunrise, we have the dawn. So they'll say when this dawns, but actually sharawa here, when this is the appearance that's arising in our mind. That is to say, we think I'm alive, and I think I'm alive, and I think I'm awake. So when that happens, I would like to avoid laziness. Lalo here in Tibetan means some kind of apathy. May I not take my life for granted, because time is short. So all schools of Tibetan Buddhism, they press very hard on meditating death and impermanence, and the how that nobody knows if they will live one more day or one more week and one more year. And I think because I'm a Dharma teacher and many people regard me as a kind of spiritual advisor or something like that, a Lama to them, I'll often get letters, probably 1 or 2 a week, which says something like, one of my kids died, or one of my nephews died. And it's always someone very upset that someone very younger than them died. But like it said, some die in the womb, some coming out, some in childhood, some in middle age. So without any apathy, understanding that life is both short and when we consider the distance from where we are to enlightenment, then if we travel very quickly, we can make it there before we die. But if we just lie around talking, I don't know, football scores, that's hard to say. And so Karma Lingpa, who wrote this little aspiration as part of his Tibetan liberation, the Tibetan Book of the Dead series, that's a collection of 6 kind of big sections, you could say. And the one on the achieving enlightenment in the bardo is, he does one which is just a kind of a prayer for achieving enlightenment in the 6 bardos, you could say. So first of those, the bardo of the waking state. And enter into tu samgam. May I take up learning, contemplation, and meditation. So when I'm awake, I should use my waking hours to learn a little bit more, think deeply about it, or penetrate to the meaning, not just gather info and in one ear and out the other. I remember when I was attending I think it was a 10-day teaching by Sakya Trizin many years ago. One thing he said at the beginning is, and you know, he looked out, and I think a lot of people were kind of sitting up like they were meditating, because you know, often like people do that. If you're in a temple, you kind of sit up and look like you're meditating. And Sakya Trizin said, now please, nobody meditate when I'm teaching, or you won't hear what I'm saying. There's a time for meditating, and a time for thinking about and time for listening. And there's a time for listening, a time for thinking about what you learned. And there's time for thinking about it, and a time for meditating on it. So don't meditate when you should be listening. And so Karma Lingpa uses an expression which is very common in Tibetan, said, Sedi Tenchik Toba, this life, this precious human life, Teljor Rinpoche, Tenchik Toba, attained but once. Of course, we may take rebirth as a human again, but in the Buddhist world, we think if we waste this life as a human, then getting it back as a human will be tough. If you just live your life like a chipmunk running around, let's go for a squirrel. I prefer squirrels to chipmunks, gathering nuts and burying them and not sure where you buried them, and then running from one to another tree to another your whole life, and then you die with nothing but all those nuts buried. Then the chances of being reborn as a squirrel again are not so big. So, like Nagarjuna puts in one of his writings, this time we've been born in a time and an age when enlightenment is everywhere. Enlightened masters are almost ubiquitous. And the ability to achieve enlightenment is very easy. To get that again is very difficult. So because we're in such a situation, if we apply ourselves to Tupa Sambhagama, learning, contemplation, and meditation, then in this lifetime, we can achieve 3 kayas. In other words, our mind can become Dharmakaya, Buddha mind, not just kind of like Buddha mind, having a quality similar to Buddha mind, but can become actual Buddha mind. And when that's the case, our mind, our thoughts and emotions become Sambhogakaya, the bliss body of a Buddha. And then our physical being transforms into total light and total energy, becoming the Nirmanakaya of a Buddha. So during this lifetime, during the bardo of the waking state, Karma Lingpa is suggesting we should do that. And I don't think anyone would argue that that would be a reasonable course of action to follow. Now, he doesn't say, don't, don't pay your rent, or don't, take care of your health. He doesn't say ignore any of that. He says, everything you do should be for the purpose, dedicated to that higher purpose. And then Milam, So when Milam is, when you're experiencing Milam, when you're experiencing dreams, so then Bardo of the sleep state. So when you're asleep and you notice you're asleep, so if you notice you're asleep when you're asleep, it means you're kind of a dreaming and knowing you're dreaming. And even though you may not at the time of the dream know you're a dream, you wake up, you remember the dream like that. So he says, may I not just sleep like a dead corpse? May I not just flop down, crash like a piece of meat, dead meat, lying on my mattress. But may I enter into the state of natural lucidity. So if we bring it back to the 11 yogas of Varsha Yogini, when we go to sleep at night, we try to follow the dissolution of the 4 coarse and 3 subtle elements, energies, and the arising of clear light mind. And as we go into sleep, to retain that sense of clear light presence throughout the sleep dream state. So here he refers to that as natural state, Semgineluk, I suppose. And the new schools will probably just say something like natural radiant nature of mind, something like that. And there he says, controlling and transforming dreams, uniting sleep with practice. So when we learn dream yoga from, say, Chakra Sambhara or Varsha Yogini Tantras, Guhya Samaja, other systems, and we often do that dream yoga training in various levels, but one of those, the first of those is learning to go to sleep consciously, and when a dream arises, to be aware that we're dreaming. And then when we're in the dream, trying to develop conscious awareness of dreaming while we're dreaming, without waking ourselves up from the dream. Controlling and transforming. Controlling in theme means getting basic navigating tools, a little bit like learning to fly an airplane, or I don't know. I think we were in Florida one time when April helped bring the monks down. Someone took them out on jet skis. And one of those little like jet motor thing, you know, one of the young tokus who couldn't even swim jumped off it and took off. And we were very scared that he was going to drown. But fortunately, he just crashed into something close enough to the shore that we could fish him out. So in the dream state, learning to control our jet skis or our airplane or helicopter or however, whatever metaphor we want to use, and then transforming. We transform the dream yoga for purposes like curing phobias, things we're afraid of, and forcing ourselves to dream of things that we fear and noticing how they are mere dreams and that we are overreacting to the appearance. In other words, it's called a kind of illusory, training in the illusory body at night is a kind of the way Naropa spoke of it. So unifying sleep with practice. And then when Samden Bardo dawns, in other words, when you're there and you're doing your practice, so during the time of sitting on your meditation cushion or doing your practice in whatever way you do it, and some people like to do walking meditations as opposed to sitting meditations. And one of Buddha's 5 main disciples had a bad back, so he would like lie down. Buddha made him lie flat on the earth to do his meditation and practice because of his bad back. So however we do it. But we're there and we say, hey, I'm in one of the 6 bardos. Let's see, I'm in the waking state. I'm not asleep. I'm not dead. That's good. Okay, I'm awake. So am I in the general waking state or am I in a meditative mode? Have I switched on my meditation button? So I'm in the meditation mode. Jan, Samden, Bardo state. And Karma Lingpa says there to completely drop the 2 main obstacles to meditation, which are kind of mental sinking and mental wandering, young Watamgupa, and to drop these two sides. And of course, he's writing this in context of Tibetan Book of the Dead, in which case it's a tantric manual for the mandala, Shitro mandala. So if you're doing it for, say, Chakrasambhara mandala or Hevajra mandala, Vajrayogini mandala, then to practice the generation and completion stage practices. In other words, generation stage of connecting to the three kayas, taking the three kayas, connecting to your natural radiance, your natural bliss, and your natural joyful playfulness. Those three, Buddha mind, Buddha bliss, and Buddha playfulness, you could say. Generation stage and completion stage, keeping clear light mind and illusory appearance in perfect balance and harmony. And he completes it by saying, in that way, flying free from distorting, maintaining total freedom from distorting states of mind. Then fourthly, when the Chika Bardo arrives, that means when we know, oops, I'm just starting to die. I'm losing it. And we're on our final deathbed, and the elements of our body start dissolving, earth into water, water into fire, fire into air, and outer signs, we can no longer lift our arms, and our heart starts slowing down, and our breathing starts getting very thin, and then we stop breathing, and so on. When that happens, when that dawns, so when I'm sitting there in that bardo on my way to enlightenment, so hopefully during lifetime, we already got enlightenment, but those of you who didn't at the time of death, those of you, I say, not those of us, but those of you who did not get enlightenment. What's Glenn hinting at? Oh no, I hope he's not hinting that he thinks. No, he wouldn't think that. I will abandon. So this word abandon that is often used in translation for pangwa means I'll drop doing that. So abandon in English is kind of a funny word, isn't it? We can just say I'll drop it. I won't do that. I'll avoid it or something like that. I will avoid, as that's happening, any sense of craving and desire. And remember the instruction. In other words, what we learned during generation stage tantra on the dissolution of the elements, and what we learned in completion stage tantra through the experiences of Tumo and the death simulation process as part of completion stage Tumo practice. What we learned in going to sleep and dream yoga about the dissolution of the coarse and subtle elements and how to observe them. So all of that, may I maintain awareness of instructions. And Harry uses the word poa. In other words, blast straight through. In other words, without losing track of what you're doing, go straight through. And come completely out the other side into clear light consciousness. In other words, into Chiwe Usel, in the clear light of moment of death. Then when the Chunyi Bardo arises, then we enter the clear light state and the radiant appearances side and the sort of beautiful Dharma vision, you could say, the clear light tunnels of the after death. And just may I just relax and into this natural radiance, and whatever arises, to see them as one's own projections, and just to rest in that natural radiance. And finally, for the sixth, when the fearful, scary bardo of taking rebirth, yikes, do I really want that guy as my father? And that the wench, is that going to be my mother? Did I see her spanking one of her other kids? I don't want a mother who spanks her kids. But who are the alternatives? Oh gosh, she seems to be the best one on the offering plate that I'm seeing. So I guess I'll have to put up with some spankings. And just as one is cycling toward rebirth, and to keep mind one pointed, and try to draw all the forces of one's punya, of one's merit or good karma, all one's forces of goodness and all of one's wisdom, and to choose carefully. And Karma Lingpa says to remember one's guru and consort, in other words, to remember Vajradhara Yabyum, or to remember Kundazampo Yabyum. Here, the Guru Yabyum really meaning one's guru and lineage of gurus as one's father, mother. Think that my real father, my real mother is really Vajradhara in union with consort. And my living gurus give me inspiration and guidance to choose carefully, because wherever I choose to bring this plane down, that's where I'm stuck. I get a womb with a view. And where I come out of that womb, let's be where I am for the next 3 bardos of Kiene and Milam, and of waking state and dream state and meditation state. That's where I am. So if it's in, I don't know, Miami Beach or Santa Fe or any other country on earth or some other planet or some other realm, some other life farm, to choose wisely. So in that way, we say stumbling to enlightenment, staggering on to enlightenment on the 6 yogas, because when we came out of the womb, often we say that as when you're very young, you'll still remember a lot of stuff from your previous life, and little kids will kind of make reference to that and show instincts. From age 3 or 4 on, the memories of this life crowd in a little bit, and then the education and upbringing in this life will bring in a whole different modus operandi. And so during our waking state of this lifetime, whether meditating or between meditation sessions, going about the things of the world in the Bodhisattva way, to do in such a way that we're taking 2 steps to enlightenment and no more than 1 back, rather than 1 step to enlightenment and 2 back. And the same in sleep, and the same on our meditation cushion. And hopefully, before we die, achieve enlightenment. So those other 3 bardos will be moot points. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then I'll look and see if there's any interesting questions on the chat box. And if anyone wants to leave 1 or 2 there, feel free to do it. So, but 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and finish off, okay?
So we'll have a brief quiet break. And as Lama Glenn said, if we wish to ask a question, we can please do so, putting that into the chat box for him to consider. And if you'd like get a stretch or a beverage, then please feel free. We'll be having a few quiet moments until that time. I did want to say one thing in case we get pressed for time, that if you're interested in Glenn's activities, that you can look him up extensively on his website, glennmullin.com. And then there's contact information, etc. as well. So thank you all. A very nice large group for coming from all over. And we'll see you in a minute.
Yeah. So yeah, the few questions popped up. One of them is from Julian Bruce. What are the qualifications, in your opinion, to begin Tumo practice? Generally, it's said we have to be a human being. Beyond being a human being, it's good if we received empowerment, and which there's every highest yoga tantra has its own Tumo method. So if you're going to do the 6 yogas of Naropa or 6 yogas of Niguma, those use what is known as the Dakini Tantra Tumo method. So usually that means either chakra samvara or he vajra empowerment. Most texts also say that you should have a strong basis of hinayana, meaning self-discipline, bit of meditation power, and some basic experience of exploration of the nature of the self that you think you are, that you are not. And something from Mahayana side of the 2 bodhicittas. The deceptive bodhicitta that thinks there is self and others, and therefore should generate very deep sense of compassion for all others and see others with as much love as a mother sees for her one and only child. And so that's always good to have that, the great love for others. And the ultimate bodhicitta, which is the sense of how all things are interconnected, and therefore nothing stands alone. So this balance of ultimate reality and conventional reality, the illusory appearance of things and the beyond appearance nature. Meeting the illusory appearance with love, compassion, and conventional bodhicitta. Meeting beyond appearance with a sense of the infinitely diverse interconnectedness of all things is a good basis. Once when I discussed this with Dalai Lama, he said, most important is you should have a mind that's a little bit relaxed from grasping and anger. In other words, you don't like the minute you see something that's attractive to the objects of the senses, you don't like pounce on it like a hungry dog on a red piece of meat. Or you see something that irritates you, it shouldn't be like, I don't know, a pit bull who gets irritated over small things very easily. You should have a mind of ngejung in Tibetan is a word, which means kind of very stable response mechanism, able to keep cool. You should be a Mr. Cool or a Ms. Cool spiritually, in terms of what comes and goes. Otherwise, if we look at it from Sakya's side, with should be free from the 4 clingings, free from the 4 bondages, and just the bondage of the appearance of things forcing you to go in a particular way. So often Tibetans call this the bondage of this life. In other words, just the way things appear is so dominant that you're totally under its power. And the bondage of running in circles. The bondage of narcissism, me first, selfishness. And the bondage of duality, grasping at duality. And on that basis, to have the empowerments and to have a good teacher. So for instance, myself, I would say after a month of training, I started doing Tumo. And I know other people who trained under the same guru and after 5 years still weren't given any Tumo teaching. So often it comes down to what's useful for that person. There's an expression that if a person's just a little bit sick, you can give a very gentle medicine. And if a person is very sick, you have to give a very powerful medicine. So I think my guru must have thought I was very sick because he gave me Tumo a couple of weeks into my training. And other people were just a little bit sick, so they didn't take up Tumo for years. And myself, I tend to encourage people to take it up earlier if they can, because it has big benefit on health and also on just general physical energy in the world. It's a little bit like in the Chinese tradition, doing the qi, the key practices in Taoism. They have a lot of benefit on many levels beyond merely the enlightenment level. And the second question, could I kindly explain clear light mind, how to distinguish whether a yogi, meditator achieved example or mother clear light, objective clear light? Thank you. So mother clear light just means Buddha nature and the radiant aspect of mind. We could call it emptiness of mind. Sometimes I use that word. Emptiness of what? Emptiness of any boundary. Vast as the space, vastest space itself, without any boundary. So the mother clear light, even the most evil person on the planet, the most harmful, a murderer, rapist, etc., his mother clear light, carries it around in his or her pocket, but doesn't have access to it. The child clear light we cultivate through yoga, meditation. And if we divide tantric highest yoga, tantra yogas into two, often we say illusory body and clear light. There's the yoga of noticing the dreamlike quality, the grand illusion, the experience of me and something else. And then there's the drama of the experiencer of the illusion. So the radiant mind that experiences the drama and the drama being experienced. So this, if we look at one side, we call that illusory body yoga, Julu. We look at it the other side, we call it Usalgina, or clear light yoga. And what are the signs of someone who practices and gets to various levels of clear light? I mean, that's discussed in a type of text called Naki Salam. And several of those are translated and kind of something said about them. But usually when we do those kind of practices, it's better that we discuss our experiences directly with our teacher and put some context on them, put them in context of, because one thing is, I think, I remember when I started serious training or proper training, as opposed to just reading and, doing yoga and meditation from books and from hearsay. What would you call it? Ad hoc learning. But when I started doing serious training, I noticed I was pretty crazy guy. And I spoke to the Dalai Lama had appointed to be our teacher. He says, yeah, when people start meditating, they often think they're going crazy. This meditating is driving me crazy. He said, but we often just don't notice that we're crazy all along, but we're looking out rather than looking in. So we didn't notice our craziness. And I think, so we get lots of experiences from that time on. And this kind of helps if we can have a sense of an overall process and how to digest them. And that's one reason for having a kind of a close relationship with a Lama, a spiritual master. Or at least, learning as much as one can about the tradition. But I think with my own students, I always point out that don't get too excited about these sort of flash mystical experiences, because they happen all the time, especially if you're doing strong practice. And stick to the main points in the training rather than get distracted by any of those sort of mystical explosions, mystical offerings that are laid at your feet as you practice. So then Thomas Edwards may ask a question. Often in our conversations, I'm falling asleep before dreams. Is this the normal dream process or something else? The same when I'm waking, this among others, clairaudience. Yeah. I think, we say that in a dream state, there's 5 ways to gain clairvoyant powers. Clairvoyance comes to us in 5 ways. And the best is through meditation, because it's very stable. And the second is through dream yoga. And we are naturally a little bit clairvoyant, randomly clairvoyant in our dreams. The dream body has clairvoyant qualities. And if we practice it as a yoga, we can become clairvoyant in our sleep. Otherwise, we just happen to spill into something. It's like running through a hotel of 1,000 doors, and the doors are opening and slamming as you run by, and you see peeks into this room and that room and this room and that room, but it's completely uncontrolled. But that quality of clairvoyance or clairaudience. Now, if we say clairvoyance in English, it means seeing, and if we audience means hearing, but the Tibetan word actually ngoshe is clear, well, she is for shepa, vijnana in Sanskrit means any of the 5 senses. It could be any of the 5 senses. So it's but let's just use clairvoyance in the bigger word of meaning. When you're asleep, you can dream about your son or daughter the other side of the world and touch base with them, and it may or may not be true. But sometimes you'll hear moms will have a dream of their kids and get very nervous, and they'll phone up and find out that there was some kind of great trauma that was clairvoyantly or clairaudiently communicated to them in the dream. So in tantric yoga, we try to take advantage of that in a systematic yogic way through what Karma Lingpa called the yogas of controlling the dream environment and transforming within the dream environment, using it in a very particular way. And I'd like to say also, by the way, Tom Edwards is a Syracuse guy. I met when I've gone through Syracuse and taught there at at the Dharma Center in town, or one of the Dharma centers in town. And he's also a Thangka painter. And it might be of interest to some of you is that he was doing a painting of a mandala of Lama Glenn, the mandala deity that Sakya Trizin Rinpoche gave the recommendation as a good practice in COVID times, and he actually gave the empowerment of it. So he had started doing that painting for someone in China, but something came up that the fellow had to bow out. So he's actually finished the painting. If anyone's interested in a painting like that, you can contact Thomas Edwards about it. It might still be available, I'm not sure, but otherwise, even a photo of it might be nice for your practice if you don't have something nice. Can you please share where we can access Karma Lingpa's aspiration? Right here. It's right here, I tell you. Burned like into solid steel. Well, it's available in his volume on the 6 liberations by seeing, by hearing, and so on, which is one of the volumes of his Terma tradition, available like that in Tibetan. And Graham Coleman put together, so most people just translated the Bardo Todal, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, without translating many of the appendices or other little add-ons that are in that section. So I think it's in Graham Coleman's book. I'm sure you can find it on the net in various places. I'm not sure if Francesca Fremantle included in her translation of Tibetan Book of the Dead or not, because I haven't seen that for like, I don't know, since I saw her way back in India, like 30, 40 years ago or something. So yeah, so you'll find it on the web quite easily and in other places, and in Graham Coleman's book, I'm sure. I haven't seen Graham Coleman's book also in many years because I don't own a copy. Could I explain about karma point during dying? Okay. Very simple. When you die, try to keep a clear mind. Very clear. Clear. More clear. More clear. More clear. Got it. So did the Tibetans do specific practices to conceive tulkus, or was this just an auspicious connection of teacher and student? It seems that there are infinite possibilities. They have a specific practice for increasing of bearing children that have attainment. Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting question from James Karna. You know, I think in the old traditions, Nyingma and Bon, in the pre-Buddhist days, often spiritual authority was passed father to son. And so it was kind of like a family tradition, much like, say, North American natives and Mongolian shamans are often family lineages. And certain families kind of have blessings, if you will, to do that kind of transformational work. But that's not got much to do with tulkus. That's just got to do with reincarnation, I would say, and transmission. And so the first tulkus in Tibet were in the Nyingma school when by legend, we can't, it's hard to say historically, but by legend, the 25 disciples of Padmasambhava were given an instruction, a command to take reincarnation in the families of the main families of the great patron practitioners from the time of Songtsen Gompo down through Trisong Dutsen, Tri Rapa Chen. And so those, the sons of those important Ngakpa or Tantrika families who were descended from those 25, they're called the Chimpuk Trubchen, the great Mahasiddhas of Chimbuk Mountain, the 25 great disciples. Those were often given the name Tulku. In other words, they're reincarnations of beings who were part of that great wave of enlightenment that took place on Chimbuk Mountain. And then later, with one of the early karma, well, but with them, it did not carry an inheritance feature. So later, I think one of the early karmapas was the first in which the tulku or reincarnate lama had an inheritance feature. So the reincarnation of the old guy got the property, the yaks and fields and monasteries and so on, whatever was owned by the old guy that was still intact became his property. And so I would say the first Karmapa and the first Sharmapa were the first who did this in a legal inheritance manner. Otherwise, it had been practiced by Nyingma for about 300 years before this as an informal non-inheritance system. In other words, they didn't overlap with the inheritance feature. And in Sakya tradition, they had what they call the uncle-nephew tradition they decided on very early. And both families would do chakra samvara and vajrayogini prayers and whatnot to draw an auspicious child for reincarnation, who would be an emanation of Manjushri, carry great wisdom and bodhisattva energy, and would be able to carry the Dharma. So for that reason, Tibetans are very superstitious about Sakyapas, because they say when Sakyapas are doing well, all of Central Asia does well. When anything falls apart with Sakyapas, everything goes wrong for all Central Asians. You could say they're like the canary in the coal mine. And so for that reason, in Tibet, Sakya Lamas were generally considered hierarchically to be the one of the three tops. There was Dalai Lama, Panchen Lama, and Sakya Trizin. So whoever was a head Sakya Lama. And after that came a rung of 8 lamas, one of whom was Karmapa, and then there were various like lings and other kind of lamas in that rung of 8. But on the top rung was Dalai Lama, I mean, in terms of the mythology, their national mythology and their national belief, you could say, paranormal knowledge of their import to the success of the tantric tradition. Dalai Lama, Panchen Lama, and Sakya Trizin, whoever was head of Sakya school at the time, those 3 were very strong. And of course, then within Sakya, they do have tulkus and reincarnate lamas, but that's outside of that. And of course, conscious dying, I think, is part of the process of the tulku process, dying consciously and leaving some signs and all that. And someone asked me, is that my number? No, that's my old number when I was out on the West Coast, Kevin. And by the way, Kevin's online, and his old friend from Miami, and he came up to Nepal a couple of times ago when I was in Nepal, and Sakya Trizin Rinpoche was giving a teaching at the time. So it was very wonderful. After the teaching, we raced up to Sakya Trizin's place, and the guy at the gate says, no one's allowed in, he's too busy and he's been teaching all day. But then someone came and stepped in, so I pushed my foot in the door and just kept my foot in the door so they didn't close it. And after about 10 minutes, someone else came to get in. So when they went through, who was living in the monastery where Rinpoche was staying, Sakya Trizin Rinpoche was staying, we pushed in a little bit more, got the other side of the door, so then we could be seen. And then one of the monks walking by looked over and recognized us and says, hey, come on up. And we were ushered in and got to spend, I don't know, 15 minutes or a half hour or something with Sakya Trizin Rinpoche, which was very, very wonderful indeed. But anyway, Kevin, I can send you my new phone number. Otherwise, also, where do those who take their lives in the bardo practice, and what do you suggest the living do for those who have committed suicide? Yes, suicide in Buddhism, it's considered an act of desperation. And so obviously great compassion is required. And that's from, that question is from Carol Dunham. People don't know her. Great writer and adventurous, a medical anthropologist, herbologist. His Wild Earth in Nepal makes fabulous medicines and medicinal herbs and so on. And also has written quite a few books. Her husband, Tom Kelly, is a very dear friend. I've known them since the late 80s. And I did a book with her husband, my translation of Tibetan Book of the Dead in simple, easy read English with Tom's photos. Anyway, so her question, I think, all Tibetan schools have a kind of practice which they call bardo jangchok, which is purification or enlightenment in the bardo. And different schools have different models for this. Obviously, Nyingma school likes to use the Shitro, peaceful, wrathful mandala of 100 deities. And so that Tibetan Book of the Dead is written as though for that mandala, but the new schools each use their own. Marpa Lotswa and Kargyu recommended Guhya Samaja, and of course Guhya Samaja is very big in Sakya as well. And but I think most popular in Sakya and Gelugpa is Chakra Samvara and the Dakini Tantras, because then the Dakinis fly down and pick you up and carry you away. And that's a nice spaceship in which to fly to a Pure Land or a rebirth, whichever is more appropriate. I don't know, if someone commits suicide, I think what would be very good is often done in Tibetan tradition is they do they do a Bardo Jangchok, but as part of the Bardo Jangchok, and some of the Bardo Jangchoks are very simple prayers, it begins with a sadhana, and then you call the person into an effigy and the person's photo, and you sort of have a conversation with them. It's always in a kind of ritual way. Notice that you're in the Bardo and so on and so forth. But then in suicide cases and the sort of people who die in battle because they were angry, which is a kind of a suicide, if you go and attack someone who's a better fighter than you and you die, it's kind of a suicide, you could say, kamikaze kind of thing. Then they'll do something like 108 recitations of the Samantabhadra Pranidhana, Kunduzambo Manam, the aspiration, the vow of Samantabhadra or something like that. It's kind of the favorite part. All Tibetan schools know it. It was very cute. When I was in Five Peak Mountain in China, with Manjusri, it's about, 10 hours, 12 hours from Beijing. It's basically South Mongolia in the old days, and it's the Manjusri Five Peaks. And when I was there, I was sitting outside the main temple, and I bumped into a Karma Kargyu Lama, who I had connected with in Nepal a little bit, and he sat down, and then someone walking by heard us talk Tibetan. He was a Gelugpa Tulku. He came over and sat with us, and then a Nyingma Lama walked by, and he sat down with us, and then we were about 6 Tulkus and me, and we started walking around, and we got to the cave on Manjusri Mountain, the main Manjusri Mountain, in which that prayer is said to be 100 times more powerful, or 1,000 times, or 1,000,000 times, or 10 million times. Always hard to say in Buddhism. More powerful. And they all started chanting it. But halfway through it, one of them kept getting lost because there's so much. They take verses and they insert them into other texts they do. And so if you're doing it from memory without reading, you'll read that and then you'll just shunt off into some other direction. But anyway, that's been published and is online in many ways. My own translation, which I made many years ago, is online, I think, as well. So with suicide people, obviously it's very, very sad. And, I know quite a few people in Korea who's had, students or people they know have had close, because they've sort of had a rough time with, the Japanese invasion in the early days, and then the Korean War, and then the kind of the poverty after like the 40 years of Japanese occupation, and then the Korean War, the devastation, and so on. So kind of a traumatized society during the 60s, 70s, 80s. So I often get people mentioning something about suicide. But in the Buddhist world, if we do any kind of Bardo Jangchok, or prayer for someone's well-being in the Bardo, any kind of Bardo prayer, you could say, just to throw in that either 3 or 7 or 21 or 108 recitations of the Samantabhadra Pranidhana, which is also known as Mahayana Pranidhana Raja, the king of Mahayana thoughts or prayers. A quick question: is sky gazing related to Bardo teaching? Not especially, other than it's an important practice on the nature of mind and the nature of emptiness. Just like the sky is vast, the mind is vast. Just like the sky can never be damaged by the cloud, in the same way our mind can never be damaged, no matter what terrible karmas we create or have created, or are creating, they dissolve. And if we look at the pure nature of sky, it becomes pure and blue and radiant again. And the mind, if we let go of our negativity, returns to that natural clear light nature. And so sky gazing, I think it was very popular in ancient times with Bunpos, and probably in Western Tibet, which, Buddhism in Tibet originally was very much inspired by the East Persian Empire. And so a kind of a cross fusion of ancient Persian traditions, Zoroastrianism and the such, with Buddhism. Because, when King Ashoka made Buddhism his national religion of his empire, then it went all the way up through Pakistan, up through Afghanistan, through eastern Iran, over on top of Tibet, over to Khotan, and Khotan over to Mongolia. And so I think sky gazing probably comes from that cross fusion, because we see it in very ancient Bun practices. And it's there as a kind of part training between meditation sessions in your cave. Go out and sit in the sun and gaze at the sky and contemplate the nature of mind in a space-like nature. So the seventh Dalai Lama put that in a poem. He said, an image of an eagle flying playfully through the clouds, were we all to keep our minds that free and playful, unobstructed in everything that we do. How excellent. An image of a rainbow, bright, shining, insubstantial in the sky, were we to take everything we experience in that same sense of beauty and illusory appearance. How wonderful, and so on. So I think we'll finish there if people don't mind. We went over a little bit. I would like just to close by saying that, I did invite some of my students and my Sangha from around the world to join in, because I wanted them to support the group in Santa Fe who are trying to create a Sakya Center out there. And I requested them to make small donations to the Sakya Center, and I'd like to thank any of them who did that. Anyone else who's listening, any donation you make, I have said I'm not going to accept anything myself. I should go to the Dharma Center out there, because sometimes I take like a chunk, I tell you, a big bite. I know, what's that mafioso saying? I just want to wet my beak. I just put my beak. But anyway, anyone who, if you can help a little bit to just make some small donation to them if you feel it was of benefit to you, and if you haven't already done so, and to give them support, because once it's up and running, I think it'll bring great benefit. And in my opinion, because New Mexico is it's the sort of the center of many of those great sacred Pueblo nations, the Hopi and the Islatas and the other of the 19 Pueblo nations, very sacred territory. And in fact, the first wave of ancient tantrikas coming to North America brought tantric symbols like the swastika and other very ancient tantric symbols, brought them with them, and we see them on rock paintings in that part of the world. So I think if we can see a center up and running successfully out there, then it'll bring great benefit. And like Tibetans say, it's a Salmon saying, when Sakyas do well, everyone does well. When Sakyas have troubles, everyone has troubles. So whether you are part of Sakya school or that's a big part of your practice or not, it'll benefit all sentient beings by helping in some way if you can. Thank you so much, and let's dedicate merit. Yawadi Yurtuda Kunga Nyempo Mutrub Gerne Drowa Chikum Malupate Salako Parcho Janjo Samjo Rimboche Maki Pana Kigu Chikum Kiban Yong Bame by Yong Kone Kondu Power. Thank you, and thanks so much again from my side to the organizers of the Santa Fe Dharma Center. I'm told there's 4 of you out there, and 4 of you who do all the work, and the others of you celebrate and get benefit from their hard work and get to reap some of that harvest. So thank all of you very much. And bye-bye for now. Ta-ta for now.
Thank you very much, Lama Glenn. I just want to say one thing. This is almost the closure of the auspicious and meritorious Saga Dawa month. So we're really happy that we had Glenn to join us and for all of us to be able to come together and have enjoyed very much what you had to say. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for bringing us all together. And we'll keep, yeah.
Thank you, April.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Dorje La wants to say a word to Lama Glenn.
Glenla.
Oh, Teshile Dorje La.
Teshidele Glenla. Thank you so much for a wonderful teaching, and we look forward to see you again in the future.
Lula, so Mambang Santa Fe La Yona and Mato Inji Nato Momo Nyamduzago Getoa.
Oh, Momo Sachore, yeah, let's
Shaba Tema talk Mato Shan Yakpa Tungoa.
Oh, let's
Level so catch
let's Tashidele, let's Jayo Sangmatashi Dele.